realized I was being watched when I heard breathing coming from inside the walls. I swear I'm not making this up. That sound, it was subtle at first, like a draft or the air settling behind the drywall. But then it changed. Breathing, deep, uneven, human. I was standing in the kitchen of the Airbnb I had rented for the week, a rustic little cottage just outside Portland, Oregon. It was supposed to be a quiet work retreat. I had my laptop open, coffee brewing, and for the first time in weeks, silence, peace. But now, that silence was broken by the sound of someone inside the walls. At first, I froze. My eyes locked on the wall next to the pantry, a smooth surface, nothing unusual, but my ears weren't lying. It wasn't just one breath, it was rhythmic, calm, as if the person, whoever it was, knew I was listening. I took a slow step forward. Another breath. Long, hollow, close. I backed away, slowly, my fingers trembling as I reached for my phone. No signal. Of course not. The place was remote, surrounded by trees and hills with spotty coverage. I felt watched. Not the kind of feeling you get when someone stares at you on the street. This was more primal, predatory, like prey being observed through a slit in the leaves. I remember whispering to myself, "There's no one in the walls. There's no one in the walls." But I was wrong. Because the moment I turned back toward the hallway, I saw it, a shadow, moving behind the air vent, and that's when I knew I wasn't alone in this house. People always ask me why I stayed. Why didn't I just leave the moment I heard something weird? Why didn't I pack my bags and run? The truth is, I'm not the kind of person who jumps to conclusions. I've never been paranoid. I've always considered myself logical, grounded, a little boring, honestly. My name is Jason Cole. I'm 33 years old, originally from Denver, Colorado, and I work in freelance graphic design, logos, websites, brand kits, the usual stuff. Nothing glamorous. I live alone, never married, no kids. My girlfriend and I broke up about 6 months before all this happened. It wasn't messy, just life pulling people in different directions. After that, I threw myself into work, too much of it. No weekends, no breaks. That's why I booked the Airbnb. I needed space, silence. I wanted to get out of the city, disconnect from the noise, emails, traffic, stress, and just think. A week in the woods. Just me, my laptop, and maybe a few hikes in the morning to clear my head. I spent hours looking through listings before I found it. Secluded forest retreat, fast Wi-Fi, full kitchen, total privacy. The pictures showed a small, cozy one-bedroom cottage with wood-paneled walls and a stone fireplace. There was a narrow dirt driveway, thick pine trees on every side, and even a little writing desk by the window. The reviews were glowing. Perfect escape from the world. Host was respectful and gave me total space. Felt like I was the only person on Earth. Exactly what I was looking for. The host's name was Dean. His profile picture showed a middle-aged man in flannel, smiling with a dog in his arms. His messages were polite and brief. No red flags. I booked 5 nights. No one knew where I was going, not even my friends. I wanted this to be my detox, my reset. And if I'm honest, maybe I wanted to feel like I could disappear for a while and the world wouldn't fall apart. That's what made what happened next even more terrifying, because if no one knew where I was, no one would know if I disappeared. I arrived late afternoon. The last stretch of the drive was a narrow gravel road that wound through thick forest. My GPS lost signal about 3 miles from the property. All I had to guide me was the host's instructions. Turn left at the rusted mailbox. You'll see a wooden gate. It's always open. Keep driving until you reach the house. When I got there, the place looked just like the pictures. The cabin was modest but charming, a small porch with 2 chairs, a firewood stack beside the door, and a tin roof that caught the soft light of the late sun. Not a soul in sight. I stepped out of the car and took a deep breath. Silence, a peaceful kind. No cars, no people, just the wind moving through the trees and the occasional bird call. I remember thinking, this is going to be exactly what I need. Inside, the place was even cozier, a little outdated, like something from the 90s, but clean. The air smelled like cedar and dust. There was a small living room with a fireplace, an open kitchen, and a hallway that led to the bedroom and bathroom. No TV, just books, board games, and a Bluetooth speaker. I loved that. There were 2 things that struck me right away, though. First, the silence inside the cabin wasn't like the silence outside. It was thicker, almost like the walls were swallowing sound. And second, every single window had heavy curtains, thick ones, too thick for such a small place. They weren't decorative either. They were the kind of blackout curtains you'd use in a theater. Not a sliver of sunlight got through. Weird, maybe, but I brushed it off. I unpacked my things, set up my laptop on the writing desk by the window, and made a cup of coffee. Everything felt fine. I even sent a quick message to Dean. Made it in. Place looks great. Thanks again. He replied almost instantly. Glad you're enjoying it. Let me know if you need anything. Nothing odd. Nothing threatening. Just a host being polite. But now that I think back on it, he answered too fast. I don't know why that stands out to me now, but it does. His reply came within seconds. No, sent from mobile tag. Just that one sentence. Like he was waiting for my message, like he already knew I had arrived. Still, I didn't think much of it. I made dinner, just pasta and a beer, then settled in to read. I planned to start working the next day. Deadlines and clients could wait. That night I slept hard. Deep sleep. The kind where you don't even dream. But at one point, I don't know the time, I woke up freezing. The window by the bed was open. I didn't remember opening it. I closed it, climbed back under the covers, and told myself it was nothing, just a small mistake. I didn't realize yet that I wasn't alone. The thing is, I wasn't just taking a random trip. This wasn't a spontaneous getaway. It wasn't a vacation where you pack your bags on a whim. No, this trip was necessary. For the past few months, my life had felt like it was on the edge of falling apart. I'd been living in Denver for almost 5 years, long enough to fall into a routine. The same office, the same coffee shop down the street, the same faces that I passed every day, like they were stuck in time. I'm not sure what I was expecting when I first moved there, but somehow the excitement wore off, and now it felt like I was moving through the motions. My job had its ups and downs. I loved design, but the constant pressure, the deadlines, it was becoming suffocating. And then there was Sarah. I don't like talking about her. Honestly, I think about her less now than I did when it all ended. But back then, we were good together, or at least I thought we were. She was smart, funny, and loved all the things I did, hiking, camping, even a simple night at home. But somewhere along the way, we just grew apart. The arguments started small. You're always working. You never have time for me. We don't talk anymore. And before I even realized it, we were just 2 people who had nothing left to say. I know it sounds cliché, but when she left, it felt like my world shifted. I tried to play it off, to move on, but it was harder than I expected. Every corner of our apartment still smelled like her perfume. Her favorite mug sat on the shelf, collecting dust. I started to resent the silence that filled the space. Work didn't help. Deadlines piled up. Clients constantly needed more revisions. And my only escape, when I wasn't obsessing over work or walking around the empty apartment, was running. Not literally running, but running away from everything else. That's when the idea of an Airbnb came to me. I needed distance, time away from the noise of my life, the noise in my head. It wasn't just about the city, it was about finding peace, or at least trying to. The ad for the cabin had popped up one night when I was scrolling through my phone. Secluded forest retreat, fast Wi-Fi, full kitchen, total privacy. Total privacy. It was exactly what I needed. A place to disconnect, no distractions, no people, no reminders of everything I was running from. And so I booked it. 5 nights. In a place so remote that there would be no one around, just trees and mountains. A place where I could finally focus, think, and reset. In the back of my mind, I thought about all the things I could do. I could finally finish the design project I'd been putting off for months. I could read a few of those books I always meant to get to. Maybe go for a hike, take in the fresh air, clear my mind. The silence of the place promised to be just what I needed. I imagined waking up to the birds singing, having a cup of coffee on the porch, and feeling like I was at peace for the first time in a long while. The first few hours at the cabin felt like a dream. I'd arrived in the late afternoon, and the sun was already starting to dip behind the trees. The cabin was beautiful, better than I expected, small but cozy. The type of place you could picture yourself living in for months if you wanted to. A little fireplace, a fully stocked kitchen, and that perfect view of the forest from the back porch. It had a charm to it that made me feel at home immediately. The host, Dean, had been easy to communicate with. He had sent me the directions and made sure I had everything I needed for my stay. He had even offered a locals guide to the area with recommendations for nearby trails and restaurants. I was impressed by how thoughtful he was. But there was something off, I suppose, just a small detail, something that I couldn't quite put my finger on. I kept trying to dismiss it. After all, I had come here to escape. Why would I let a few little things get to me? The first night was quiet. The wind whistled outside, but inside I could feel the warmth of the fire as it crackled in the hearth. It was peaceful. There was no noise, no sound of cars passing by, no distant city lights, just me and the woods. I spent the evening getting comfortable. I set up my laptop and started working on a few minor tasks, but as I glanced out the window, something caught my eye. The woods looked endless, stretching for miles, no houses in sight, no signs of civilization at all. It was peaceful, but a little unnerving too. There was no one around. I liked the solitude, but I also couldn't shake the feeling that something about this place felt too empty. When I went to bed, the darkness seemed to swallow everything. There was no ambient light, no street lamps, no distant neighbors, just darkness. The moment I lay down, I could hear the creaking of the cabin's wooden floors. Nothing unusual, I thought. Old houses tend to make noise. But this wasn't the kind of sound you expect from a place that was supposed to be quaint. It was too much. The way the floorboards groaned under the weight of something unseen. It didn't help that the bed felt off. The mattress was firm, almost uncomfortably so, and the pillows didn't quite feel right. I tried to brush it off and pull the covers up, but the wind outside howled as it swayed the branches against the cabin's walls. In the middle of the night, I woke up, cold. I couldn't understand why. The fireplace was still burning, and I was under 3 blankets, but the air felt sharp, like something was wrong. The window beside my bed was open. I didn't remember opening it. It was strange, but I didn't think much of it. I closed it and rolled over, trying to shake off the feeling of unease that was creeping into my bones. My eyes fluttered shut again, but just before I fell back asleep, I heard it. A soft sound, like a breath. It was coming from behind the wall, from the space on the other side of the bedroom, not from outside, not from the trees, from inside the cabin. My heart skipped a beat. I told myself it was nothing. The house creaked. That was all. A fluke. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. I just didn't know what it was yet. I woke up the next morning feeling off. It wasn't anything specific, just a vague discomfort, an unease that I couldn't shake. The cabin, despite its charm, felt a little too quiet, too empty. I had barely slept the night before, and when I opened my eyes, the first thing I noticed was the darkness. I had expected to wake up to natural light, the golden rays of the sun streaming through the thick curtains. But no, the room was still enveloped in the same heavy blackness it had been in when I closed my eyes. It felt wrong somehow. The window beside my bed was shut tight. I thought nothing of it. Perhaps I had closed it during the night. I didn't remember doing so, but I didn't dwell on it. I pulled myself out of bed and went to the kitchen to make some coffee. The smell of freshly brewed coffee always calms me, especially in new places. But even as I prepared it, there was something strange about the cabin. It felt like the walls were closing in on me. I tried to brush it off. I wasn't here to overthink. I was here to relax. But my mind kept drifting back to the night before, to the sound, that breath I had heard from inside the wall. I told myself it was nothing, just an old house settling, right? But still, as I drank my coffee and looked out the window at the thick woods surrounding the cabin, I couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that something was wrong. It wasn't until later that day that I started to notice the first strange signs. The sun was higher now, casting harsh shadows across the cabin's interior. I'd just finished answering a few emails when I noticed something odd. The living room light flickered. It wasn't like a bulb dying. It was more like someone was turning it off and on, fast, inconsistent. I glanced up. It was still daylight outside, so I didn't need the light on, but that wasn't the point. It was the way it flickered, as if someone, somewhere, was playing with the switch. I stood up, walked over to the light, and flipped the switch off and on. It worked fine, no problem. Still, something didn't sit right. I didn't think much of it at the time, just a weird electrical issue, but it was the first moment I felt that creeping sense of unease that I couldn't explain. Later, I went for a walk. The cabin sat on a large plot of land with a few trails winding through the woods. I wanted to clear my mind and get some fresh air. As I walked along the trail, I noticed something strange. There were no animals, no birds, no squirrels, no insects, nothing. The woods should have been alive with the sounds of nature, but it wasn't. It was silent, dead silent. I tried to push it out of my mind. Maybe I was just overthinking everything. Maybe it was just an off day. When I returned to the cabin, I felt a strange urge to check around the house. Maybe it was a result of my growing paranoia, but I felt like I needed to make sure everything was in order. The bedroom was fine, the kitchen was untouched, and the living room had the same comforting air of being lived in. But then I went into the bathroom. At first glance, everything seemed normal, but as I looked closer, I noticed something off. There was a slight scratch mark on the edge of the bathroom mirror, barely noticeable, but there, like someone had scraped it with something sharp. I ran my finger over it, but it didn't feel smooth. It was like the mark had been there for a long time. I pulled back, feeling uneasy. Maybe it was just wear and tear, but the more I thought about it, the more it unsettled me. And then the noises started again. This time, it wasn't the walls. This time, it was the floorboards. I was sitting on the couch, my feet up, scrolling through my phone when I heard it. A soft, creaking sound. The same sound I'd heard the night before. It was faint, but unmistakable. I paused, held my breath. The house was perfectly still. The noise came again. Creak. It was coming from the hallway, just outside the living room. I got up and walked over to the hallway. I stood at the entrance, staring into the dimly lit space. Nothing moved. Nothing was there. I told myself I was imagining it. After all, old houses creak. They settle. That's just how they are. But then, the light flickered again. This time, it wasn't subtle. It was a full-on strobe. flickering rapidly as though something was trying to make it malfunction. I rushed over to the switch, but before I could turn it off, the light just stopped. No flicker, no hum. It simply went out. I stood there in the dim glow of the window. My pulse started to quicken. My breath became shallow. I wasn't alone. I started to feel like someone was watching me. I could almost sense eyes on the back of my neck, prickling my skin. I checked the front door, the back door. Everything was locked, but somehow it wasn't enough. That night, as I lay in bed, I heard it again. The breathing. It was faint, like someone was trying to be quiet, but I could hear it. Deep, steady breaths, not mine, not the wind, from inside the walls. I lay there frozen, barely able to move. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. It was close, too close, right behind the wall next to my bed. I grabbed my phone from the nightstand and checked the time. 3:03 a.m. The cabin was silent, except for that low, steady sound. It wasn't an animal. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't the house settling. There was someone or something under in the walls. I got up quietly and crept toward the wall where the sound was coming from. I pressed my ear against the wood. The sound stopped. Dead silence. I felt a chill in my spine. I backed away, heart pounding in my chest, and immediately checked the window. It was closed, tightly sealed. The curtains, thick and heavy, hung perfectly still. But I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was out there. I rushed to the door and turned the lock. I grabbed my jacket and threw it over my shoulders. I wasn't sure what I was planning to do, but I needed to move. I had to get out of there. As I turned to walk towards the door, I caught a glimpse of something strange out of the corner of my eye. It was a shadow, a figure standing in the doorway. I froze, my pulse skyrocketed, but when I blinked, it was gone. By the next morning, I was already on edge. The previous night had been a nightmare, to put it lightly. The breathing from the walls had been too real, too close. I could still feel the cold fingers of fear crawling up my spine. I tried to brush it off, but the silence that followed was far worse than any noise. It was the kind of silence that felt suffocating, like something was lurking just out of sight, waiting to pounce. I hadn't slept much after that. I barely even moved from my bed, staring into the dark, trying to convince myself that it was all in my head. The creaks, the flickers, the breath, none of it made sense. But still the fear gnawed at me. The cabin was quiet, but not the peaceful kind of quiet. It was a heavy quiet, a disturbing quiet. I finally decided to reach out to Dean. I needed some kind of explanation, even if it was something trivial, a natural cause for everything that had been happening. His messages were usually short, polite, almost too polite, but today I wanted to see if he could help clear things up. I grabbed my phone and shot him a quick message. "Hey Dean, everything's okay, but I've been hearing some strange noises in the cabin. The walls creak and sometimes it feels like someone's walking around upstairs. Just wanted to make sure it's nothing to worry about. Hope I'm just imagining it." I hit send and waited. Dean's reply came almost immediately. "Hey Jason, I'm so sorry about the noises. Old cabins like that can creak and settle. It's nothing to worry about. The previous guest didn't mention anything unusual, but if you're concerned, let me know and I can come by to check on you." I didn't know if I felt reassured or more unsettled. Nothing to worry about. I couldn't ignore the fact that it felt like I was being watched. Not by the woods outside, but by someone who knew the cabin inside and out. Someone who was too familiar with its quirks and creaks. I texted him back, "Thanks, Dean. I'm just a little jumpy. I'll keep an eye out for anything else. No need to come by." But the more I thought about it, the more I realized there was something off about Dean's reply. It was too quick, too eager to calm me down, like he was trying a little too hard to assure me that everything was fine. And then it hit me. He didn't ask for any details. He didn't ask what I'd heard or where the sounds had come from. It was as if he already knew what had been happening. I tried to shake the thought away. maybe I was just paranoid. After all, I was in the middle of nowhere, alone in a strange cabin. My mind was probably playing tricks on me, but when I looked up, I noticed something I hadn't seen before. The cabin was set far off from the road, and the driveway was winding and long. There was no reason anyone should just show up. But as I sat in the living room, staring out the window at the forest, I noticed a dark shape moving along the tree line. I stood up, squinting. Was it a person? A shadow? Then I saw him. Dean. He was walking through the trees, his flannel shirt blending in with the foliage, moving in a way that felt too calculated, too deliberate. I froze. What the hell was he doing? I grabbed my jacket and rushed outside, stepping carefully over the porch steps. The cool air hit my face, but I barely noticed it. I had to get answers. I had to figure out what was going on. I walked toward the edge of the driveway, watching Dean move closer. He was still at the edge of the trees, but I could see him clearer now. He didn't look lost. He didn't look like he was out for a casual stroll. He looked like he was watching me. I don't know how long I stood there, but by the time I reached the driveway, he turned toward me and smiled. "Hey there, Jason," Dean said, his voice too chipper, too casual. It didn't match the tension that I felt. I just wanted to make sure everything was okay. "Is the cabin treating you all right?" I blinked, confused. I thought everything was fine, just hearing a few strange sounds, that's all. He nodded, that same strange smile never leaving his face. "Yeah, I figured as much. Old houses. They get noisy, you know, but it's totally normal, totally harmless." He stepped closer, and I could feel my stomach tighten. "I'm just checking up on you. I know this place can feel a little isolated sometimes," he continued. "But hey, you're here to relax, right? To get away from it all. You deserve it." There was a pause. Dean's eyes seemed to linger just a little too long on mine. Too long. He was too close now. I could smell the faint scent of wood smoke on him, mixed with something else, something off. I forced a smile, stepping back slightly. "I'm fine, really, but I appreciate the check-in. I'll let you know if anything comes up." Dean nodded, still smiling. "Of course. You let me know if you need anything. I'll be around." I watched as he turned and started walking back into the trees, that strange, calculated pace once again. As he disappeared into the forest, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Why was he here? And more importantly, how did he know I was awake? That night, I decided to confront it. I couldn't ignore the feeling anymore. Something about Dean's sudden appearance, his odd behavior, and the fact that he had been lurking just outside the cabin. It didn't sit right. I checked every lock, every window, every door. I wasn't sure if it would do any good, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Around 11 p.m., there was a soft knock on the door. I froze. I didn't move for a moment, just staring at the door. My heart started racing again. Could it be him? I slowly walked to the door, peeking through the peephole. No one was there. But just as I was about to turn away, I saw something on the ground, a small package. My stomach dropped. I bent down and picked it up. It was wrapped in brown paper with no return address, no name, just a string tied around it, holding it together. I brought it inside and sat at the kitchen table. My hands trembled as I untied the string and opened the paper. Inside, I found a single photograph. It was a picture of the cabin, taken from the woods. There was no date, no note, just the image of the cabin, standing alone in the distance, shrouded by the trees. But in the photo, there was something else. A figure, standing just behind the cabin, barely visible between the trees. It was Dean. The photograph sat on the kitchen table in front of me, like an accusation. A single, unmarked picture of the cabin, taken from the woods. and in the background, Dean. I could barely make out his figure hidden in the trees, but there was no mistaking the flannel shirt. The same shirt he had been wearing earlier when he walked through the woods. I felt a chill run down my spine. How long had he been watching me? I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but everything in my gut told me that this wasn't just some weird coincidence. It was deliberate. This wasn't the first time I had felt watched, and now I couldn't ignore the overwhelming sense that something was wrong. I spent the next few hours pacing around the cabin, my mind racing. What was going on here? Why would Dean leave me a photograph? Why was he in the woods when I hadn't seen him? I tried to tell myself I was being paranoid. Maybe it was just a coincidence. Maybe Dean was just being overly friendly. Maybe I was imagining things. But the nagging doubt in my mind wouldn't let go. I had to get answers. I couldn't sit in this cabin for another minute, wondering what was happening behind the scenes. I had to confront the situation head on. So I decided to do something I'd been avoiding. I searched the cabin. I started with the obvious. I checked the windows and doors again. They were all locked, just as I had left them. I ran my fingers along the edges of the frames, feeling for any signs of tampering or something out of place. But there was nothing. Everything appeared to be secure. Then I moved to the walls. I know it sounds crazy, but I felt like I had to check. The noises I had heard, the breathing, the creaking, they had to be coming from somewhere. And in my gut, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something behind those walls. I grabbed a flashlight and moved through the cabin, running the beam of light along the walls, the corners, the ceiling. Nothing, no holes, no signs of hidden passageways. But then I got to the bedroom. I don't know why I didn't think to check there sooner. Maybe I had subconsciously avoided it, but something told me I needed to look. I checked under the bed, in the closet, behind the curtains. I turned the room upside down, looking for anything suspicious. And that's when I saw it. There was a small hole in the wall behind the bed, just big enough for someone to peek through. I felt a cold sweat break out on my skin. I ran my fingers along the edges of the hole. It was rough, like it had been made recently. And when I leaned in closer, I could swear I heard a faint noise coming from the other side. I backed away from the hole, my mind racing. Could it be possible? Was someone really watching me from the other side? I ran out of the room, back into the living room, and grabbed my phone. My hands were shaking as I texted Dean again. "Hey Dean, just wanted to let you know that I found a hole in the wall in the bedroom. Is this something that's supposed to be here?" I hit send before I could second guess myself. Dean's reply came almost instantly. "Oh, sorry about that. It's just an old cabin. Things get worn down over time. It's nothing to worry about. I'll take care of it when you leave." His response was too quick, too casual, and once again, he didn't ask for any details. He didn't even acknowledge that I had mentioned hearing noises, seeing the photograph, or feeling watched. It was as if he was brushing me off. I stared at the screen, my heart racing. It wasn't just the hole. It was the way he responded, the way he seemed to know everything about the cabin and didn't care to explain it. It felt rehearsed. I wasn't sure if I could trust him anymore. I decided I wasn't going to wait around for Dean to take care of it. Something told me that I had to figure this out myself. And I wasn't about to sit here and ignore the glaring signs that something was horribly wrong. I moved back to the kitchen, grabbing a screwdriver from the drawer. I had no idea what I was looking for, but I felt the need to investigate further. I started unscrewing the kitchen cabinets, hoping to find something, anything that would explain what was going on. As I worked, I noticed something strange. The cabinets felt off. They were heavier than I expected, like they had extra weight inside. I pried open the doors of one of the upper cabinets and felt around the edges. Sure enough, there was something there. I ran my fingers along the wood, and that's when I felt it. A hidden compartment. It was small, barely noticeable, but it was there. My heart skipped a beat. as I pulled open the compartment. Inside, there was a small black box. I stared at it for a moment, my mind racing. Why would someone hide a box inside a cabinet in the kitchen? What was in it? I opened the box carefully, trying to keep my breathing steady. Inside was a small camera, the kind you could buy online for cheap. It was tiny, barely noticeable, but it was there, a hidden camera. It was pointed directly at the kitchen table. The blood drained from my face. I'd been sitting at that table for the past few days, eating, working, reading, and someone had been watching me the entire time. I didn't know what to think. The camera wasn't the only thing I found in that compartment. There was also a small notepad with handwritten notes. My hands shook as I flipped through the pages. It was a log of my movements, when I went to bed, when I woke up, what I ate, what I did during the day. There were even notes about what I had said in conversations with myself. I felt my stomach twist into a tight knot. Was Dean really keeping track of me? I slammed the box shut, trying to process what I had just found. But before I could think any further, I heard something, a faint knocking sound at the door. I froze. I stood there in the kitchen, staring at the door. The knocking continued, soft at first, then harder. Whoever was outside wasn't leaving. I wasn't sure if I should open it. My mind was reeling, but I couldn't ignore it. I had to confront this. I grabbed the camera and the notebook and shoved them into a bag. I couldn't leave them behind. I walked to the door, my heart pounding in my chest. Slowly, I opened it. There was Dean, standing at the doorstep, looking as calm and collected as ever. "Hey, Jason," he said, his smile never faltering. "I just wanted to check in again. Everything okay?" I couldn't even look at him. Not after everything I had found. But I forced myself to say something. "You were spying on me," I said, my voice shaky but firm. "I found the camera, the notes. You've been watching me this whole time." Dean's eyes narrowed slightly, but his smile never faded. "I'm just making sure you're safe. I wouldn't want anything to happen to you out here all alone." His words were calm, but his eyes, there was something in them, something cold. "I don't know what you're talking about," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm leaving, right now." I grabbed my keys and walked past him, not looking back. I couldn't leave. Not yet. I had my keys in hand, the camera and the notepad tucked into my bag, and I was already halfway to the door when I realized I wasn't going anywhere. I had been on edge for days now. The noises, the strange behaviors, the constant feeling of being watched. They were no longer just symptoms of paranoia. Something was wrong here. Something far worse than I had imagined. I froze, my hand still on the doorknob, and looked back toward the living room. The camera I had found was in my bag, but it wasn't just the camera. It was the notes, the log, the twisted record of my movements, my thoughts. It was as if Dean knew everything about me. Every step I took, every word I said to myself, every time I sat at that damn table drinking coffee, working. I needed to know. I couldn't just leave without understanding what was happening, not after everything I'd discovered. With my heart pounding, I turned around and set my bag on the couch. I took a deep breath. The air felt heavier now, like the walls were pressing in. Every creak, every distant sound sent a jolt through my body. I started to move again, this time toward the back door, the wooden door that led out to the porch. But as I reached the door, something stopped me. A faint smell. It was a sharp, pungent odor, almost like mold, but heavier. Something had been left to rot. It was coming from behind the door. I hesitated, unsure of what I'd find. My curiosity was pulling me forward, but my fear told me to stop. What if this is it? What if I'm just imagining things? But it wasn't just imagination anymore. The smell was overpowering. I couldn't ignore it. I gripped the door handle and pulled it open. The porch was dark. The night had fully fallen by now, and the forest outside was a thick mass of shadows. But beyond the porch, I could see something strange. A small path leading down to the side of the cabin. It wasn't visible during the day, not from the front of the house at least. It was narrow, overgrown with vines, but it led somewhere, I could tell. I had to go down there. I grabbed my flashlight, trying to steady my hands. The path was so narrow that I had to push past the vines and branches to make room for myself. The flashlight beam bounced off the leaves, casting eerie shadows against the trees. The further I walked, the stronger the smell became. It was putrid now. Rotten wood, something decaying, hidden away just beyond my reach. I had to know what was down there. After what felt like an eternity, the path opened up into a small clearing. In the middle of the clearing was a small shed. It was weathered and old, with cracks running along the walls and a rusted roof. The door was cracked open, as though it had been used recently. I hesitated, standing in the clearing, the flashlight beam shaking in my hands. This was it. This was the moment where everything could change, the moment where I would find out the truth. I took one step forward, then another, until I was standing right in front of the shed. The smell was unbearable now. It was coming from inside. I pushed the door open. The hinges screamed, echoing in the stillness of the night. Inside the shed, the air was thick with the smell. It hit me immediately, almost suffocating me, but I couldn't turn back now. There was a small desk in the center of the room. It looked old, like everything else in the cabin, but that wasn't what caught my attention. It was the monitor. A large computer screen sat on the desk, connected to several wires and cameras mounted on the walls. It was the same kind of camera I had found in the kitchen, cheap, hidden, and it was set up everywhere. Everywhere. I turned my flashlight toward the corner of the room. There were 4 more cameras, angled toward different spots in the cabin. Each one appeared to be monitoring a different part of the house. I could see the live feed on the monitor, the images flickering, showing different angles of the kitchen, the hallway, the living room, and even the bedroom. I stepped forward, closer to the monitor. My breath caught in my throat as I saw it, a live feed of the living room, showing me sitting there earlier, drinking coffee. I hadn't even realized I was being watched, and then the screen flickered. It switched to another angle. It showed Dean. The feed showed Dean, but it wasn't just any feed, it was a close-up. Dean was sitting in a chair just behind the wall, hidden by a set of curtains. He was watching me. His eyes were locked onto the camera, staring directly at me, even though he couldn't possibly know I was looking. I stumbled back, almost tripping over my own feet. The flashlight slipped from my hand and rolled across the floor, landing in the corner of the shed. I was shaking. My mind raced. This wasn't just some odd behavior. This wasn't a coincidence. Dean had been watching me for days. But why? What was he trying to do? I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think straight. I looked back at the monitor. It flickered again. The feed changed. It was showing me moving around the cabin, the camera angles shifting as if someone was controlling it. Someone was tracking my every move. And then I heard something behind me. A soft creak. I spun around. The door to the shed was open again. I hadn't heard anyone come in. Dean was standing in the doorway. His face was blank, emotionless. "Jason," he said softly, his voice oddly calm. "I thought I told you everything was fine." I stood there, frozen in place. My mind was blank. I couldn't speak. I couldn't move. Dean stepped inside, his boots crunching on the dirt floor. "You've been poking around," he said, his voice still level. "You shouldn't have done that." I took a step back, but Dean was already too close. He reached out, his hand closing around my wrist, gripping tightly. "I told you," he said, his tone changing. "You should have just trusted me." I tried to pull away, but his grip was too strong. My heart raced, pounding in my chest. "You've been a good guest," Dean continued, his voice strangely soothing. "But you're about to be more than that." And that's when I realized what was happening. This wasn't just about watching. This wasn't just about privacy. This was something far more sinister. I was trembling, my breath coming in shallow, desperate gasps. Dean's grip on my wrist was like iron, and every inch of my body screamed for me to break free, to run. But I couldn't move. I couldn't think. The realization hit me like a freight train. The man I had trusted, the man who owned this cabin, was the very reason my life had been turned upside down. Dean was watching me. Every move, every thought, every conversation I had, he knew it all. I looked at him, trying to steady myself, but the cold, calculated expression on his face sent a chill down my spine. There was no trace of the kindly host I had communicated with through messages. This man, standing before me, was someone else, a stranger, someone I didn't recognize. "You've been poking around," Dean said again, his tone low and even, almost as though he were lecturing a child. "I told you, you shouldn't have done that. It's not safe for you here anymore." My heart raced. I tried to pull my wrist out of his grip, but it was useless. He was too strong. "Let go of me, Dean," I demanded, my voice breaking as I finally found the courage to speak. Dean's eyes narrowed, his lips curling into a thin smile. "You're not in control here, Jason. You never were. This place, it's not just a cabin. It's more than that. I gave you the chance to leave on your own, but now you've seen too much. You know too much." A cold sweat coated my skin, and I swallowed hard. I needed to escape. "Let go!" I shouted, this time pulling harder, my body squirming against his grip. "I didn't sign up for this. I want out of here." Dean's grip tightened, his face growing darker. "You should have been more careful," he said softly, almost pityingly, before his voice grew cold again. "But now, you're mine." The words sent a shockwave through me. I couldn't understand. Why was he doing this? What did he want with me? What had I stumbled into? I needed to think. My mind was racing, but it felt like everything was happening too fast. Dean's eyes flickered to the monitor on the desk, and that's when I realized something. I wasn't just another guest to him. I was the guest. The walls of the shed seemed to close in on me. The camera, the notepad, the logs, everything was leading to this moment. I had been watched for days, manipulated, tracked, controlled. Suddenly, the door to the shed creaked open and my heart skipped a beat. I twisted my head, expecting the worst. Was he bringing someone else in? But no, it was just the wind. The door swung back gently, and the shadows from outside seemed to dance across the shed's walls, momentarily distracting Dean. I saw my chance. With every ounce of strength, I yanked my wrist out of his grasp. His grip was momentarily loosened, and I bolted toward the door. My heart hammered in my chest as I ran, the sound of my footsteps deafening in the stillness of the night. I could hear Dean's footsteps behind me, quick, deliberate. He wasn't far behind. "Don't look back. Don't stop." I could feel my breath burning in my lungs as I reached the clearing. My eyes darted to the cabin, barely visible in the distance. I knew I had to make it back to the main house, to the porch, where I could hopefully find an escape route. I sprinted toward the cabin, my feet slipping on the uneven ground, the fear coursing through my veins. My mind was screaming at me to move faster, but my body was betraying me, exhausted and frail. Behind me, Dean's voice rang out. "You can't escape, Jason. You're not going anywhere." I turned the corner of the cabin, nearly crashing into the back wall, but I couldn't stop now. I had to find a way out. I'm not dying here. I'm not becoming part of his twisted game. I raced toward the back door of the cabin, which was still slightly ajar. I reached out and grabbed the handle, slamming it open, only to find that it wasn't the exit I had hoped for. Inside, there was a narrow hallway, and at the end of it, a locked door. I turned, panic rising in my chest. Dean was almost upon me. I heard his heavy footsteps, and I knew I was running out of time. "Think, Jason, think!" Without thinking, I grabbed a nearby lamp from a table and hurled it at the window, shattering the glass. I crawled through the jagged opening, my clothes tearing, but I didn't care. I had to get out. I tumbled to the ground, scraping my arms and legs, but I didn't stop. I pushed myself up and sprinted toward the forest. The woods were thick and dark, but they were my only chance. I had to lose him. I didn't know how far I ran. My breath was ragged, my legs burning, but I pushed on, weaving through the trees. The moon was barely visible through the canopy, but the light was enough to guide me. The crunch of leaves underfoot was the only sound I could hear, and I prayed it was enough to drown out the sound of Dean's pursuit. I didn't know where I was going. I didn't know how to get out of the woods. But I had to keep going. Just as I thought I might escape, I heard something, a scream. It was a cry for help, a faint, distant voice. No, not a voice, a scream. I turned back toward the cabin. The scream had come from inside. A sudden realization hit me. There were other people in that cabin, other people Dean had been watching, other victims who had been trapped just like me. I froze, torn between running and going back to help. But then I remembered Dean. I couldn't be caught again. Not now. I had come too far. The scream echoed once more. I looked toward the clearing in the distance, knowing I had to make a choice. I ran through the forest, heart pounding, adrenaline surging through my body. Every fiber of my being screamed to escape, but the guilt gnawed at me. I couldn't leave. I couldn't let Dean trap anyone else. I reached a small road, barely visible through the trees, and the sound of an engine reached my ears. A car. I looked toward the road and saw headlights cutting through the darkness. I ran toward the car, waving my arms frantically. "Help!" I screamed, stumbling toward the vehicle. "Please, help me! He's after me!" The car slowed, then stopped. The door opened, and a man stepped out. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice calm, but filled with concern. I nodded, too afraid to speak. I scrambled into the passenger seat, slamming the door behind me. The man didn't ask any questions. He just started the engine and drove off, speeding away from the cabin. As we left the woods behind, I looked back. My heart still raced, my mind unable to fully grasp what had just happened. I should have felt relief. I should have felt like a weight had been lifted from my shoulders, like the nightmare was finally over. I should have felt safe. But the truth was, when I was in that car, speeding away from the woods, my heart was still racing, my mind still spinning with images of Dean's cold, unfeeling eyes, his grip on my wrist, the photos, the cameras, the log of my every move. I should have been free. But all I felt was empty. The car's headlights cut through the darkness, but everything around me felt shadowed, as if the world itself had become a hollow place. A place I didn't recognize anymore. I didn't know how much time had passed, maybe hours, maybe longer. The man who had rescued me, I didn't even know his name, drove in silence, glancing at me occasionally, his eyes full of worry. But he didn't push me to talk. At first, I thought I was going to be sick. My stomach twisted in knots, and every muscle in my body felt tight, like I was still caught in the grip of something dark and relentless. The further we drove, the more my mind replayed those moments back at the cabin. The cameras, the scream, Dean's twisted expression. I thought I was free. But even now, the fear still clung to me. We drove for miles. The city lights were a distant blur now, far behind us. Eventually, we pulled into a small diner. The man parked the car and turned to me. "You should come inside," he said, his voice warm. "It's not safe to stay out here alone." I nodded mechanically, my hands still trembling. I didn't know what I was supposed to do next. I didn't know where I was going or what came after this nightmare. I felt lost. I followed him into the diner, but as we stepped through the door, I felt the weight of every pair of eyes on me. I didn't even want to look around. I just needed to breathe. I sat down at the counter, my hands still shaking. The man, who was now sitting next to me, finally spoke again. "I don't know what happened to you back there, but I could see it in your eyes. You're not the same person who got in that car." I tried to speak, but my throat was dry. I could barely process his words, let alone respond to them. What was there to say? How could I explain the things I had seen, the feeling of being watched for so long. The waiter came over with a glass of water, and I gratefully accepted it, drinking it slowly, as though it could wash away the memory of the cabin. But I knew it wouldn't. The man sat there, quietly, waiting for me to speak. I couldn't find the words. What could I say? How could I explain the way I felt? How could I put into words the way Dean had turned my world upside down? How could I explain that nothing felt real anymore? As the minutes passed, my mind wandered back to the cabin. The dark, looming walls, the constant feeling of being watched. I'd never thought I'd find myself in a situation like that. I never imagined I'd become a victim. I'd always been independent, confident in my ability to handle life's challenges. But this was different. This was something I had no control over. Dean had known things about me, personal things. How? Why? Why had he done it? I replayed the events in my mind, the hole in the wall, the cameras hidden in the kitchen, the terrifying realization that every moment of my life had been monitored. There had been something so calculated about Dean, something so cold and predatory. But the worst part was that he had been playing me, manipulating me like a puppet, and I had no idea until it was almost too late. I clenched my fists, feeling the anger rise up within me. How could I have been so blind? How had I not seen the signs sooner? The shame crept in next. I had been stupid. I had trusted him. I had trusted the cabin, the isolation, the promises of peace. But what I had walked into was something far darker. I had been trapped, and the worst part, I wasn't sure I'd ever be free of it. The feeling, the sense that Dean was still out there watching me, lurking in the shadows. It was something I couldn't shake. The waiter returned, setting a plate of food in front of me. He smiled, but there was a hint of concern in his eyes. "You've been through something, haven't you?" he asked gently. I stared at the plate, unable to bring myself to eat. I didn't feel hungry. I didn't feel anything except that gnawing emptiness in my chest. I nodded slowly, unable to find the right words. The man who had helped me smiled kindly, but didn't press me further. I was grateful for that. I needed time. I needed space to process everything. The terror, the panic, the realization that I had been completely controlled. But in the quiet of that diner, with the hum of the refrigerator and the faint chatter of other patrons, I felt a new kind of loneliness, a hollow emptiness that I couldn't fill. The night dragged on, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was still running. I had escaped the physical cage, but in my mind I was still trapped. Dean's eyes, his cold, calculating stare, haunted me. I realized something. I couldn't escape what had happened. It was inside me now, the fear, the paranoia, the constant watching. It would follow me, whether I was in a city or a secluded cabin in the woods. I had been broken. I'd spent so long feeling safe, assuming that nothing like this could happen to me. But the truth was, it had happened, and now every part of me felt as though it had been ripped apart. I stood up, pushing my plate aside. I wasn't hungry. My stomach was twisted in knots, and I didn't know how to fix it. The man looked at me again, his expression soft, but filled with understanding. "You don't have to talk about it now, but whenever you're ready, I'm here." I gave him a small, tight smile. "Thank you," I said quietly. The diner door opened with a soft chime, and for a moment I thought I heard something. A faint, distant voice. I looked up, my heart racing for a second. But when I saw no one, I realized it was just the wind blowing through the cracked door. It was just the wind. I left the diner that night with a vague sense of relief. But relief was different now. It wasn't the freedom I had hoped for. It was just the quiet after the storm. I walked away from the diner, feeling the weight of the world pressing on me, and I knew one thing for sure. I would never be the same again. The horrors I had experienced in that cabin would follow me for the rest of my life. The memories, the images, the fear, it was all carved into me. I was scarred, but I also knew something else. I had survived, and in the end, that was all I had: survival. As I walked into the night, I realized I had only one choice left: to keep moving forward, even if it felt like I was walking through a world that no longer made sense, even if it felt like I was still being watched. I couldn't let the fear control me anymore. I had to take back what was left of me. I hadn't spoken to anyone for days after that. I don't even know why I was avoiding them. Friends, family, co-workers, all of them sent me messages, called me, asking how I was doing, where I was. But I didn't want to talk to any of them, not yet. It wasn't like I was mad at them. They didn't know. They couldn't understand. I barely understood myself. After I left the diner that night, I stayed in a small hotel, one of those places that was anonymous and cold, with thin walls and flickering fluorescent lights. No one there would ask questions. No one would care. It was easier that way. I had to process everything. But how do you process something like this? How do you make sense of the chaos, the horror, the sick feeling that had been burning through me ever since I stepped into that cabin? Dean's face haunted my every waking moment, his eyes cold and calculating, his voice soft and reassuring, even as he manipulated me. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw him lurking in the shadows of the cabin. The cameras, the photographs, the log of my life scribbled on those pages like a twisted diary. I had been a puppet. He had controlled every move I made, and I hadn't even seen it. I'd always thought I was strong, independent. I thought I could handle anything, but that cabin, it changed everything. It didn't just break my trust in Dean, it broke my trust in myself. For the first few days, I didn't leave the hotel. I stayed in my room, staring at the walls, scrolling through my phone, reading the same texts over and over again, but I never replied. I tried to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, I felt that suffocating weight of the cabin pressing in on me. The house was so quiet, too quiet. But underneath that silence was something far worse. The sensation of being watched. It was never going to leave me. The moment I had escaped, I thought I was free. I thought it was over. But the truth was, the moment I left that cabin, it followed me. The fear, the paranoia, the questions. Who else had he done this to? Was I the first? The last? Was this just some twisted game to him? But the worst thought? What if I wasn't the first? What if there were others who hadn't been as lucky as me? I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to go back to normal life after everything I had experienced. How could I explain it to anyone? How could I even talk about it without sounding crazy? You're just a guy who stayed in a cabin for a few days. What's the big deal? That's what I would tell myself. But I knew it wasn't that simple. It wasn't just a cabin. Dean had broken me, but he'd done something worse than just manipulating me. He had taken something from me, trust. And it wasn't just about trusting other people anymore. It was about trusting myself, about trusting my ability to make decisions, to understand what was real. How could I live my life if I couldn't trust myself? The nightmares started soon after. Not just the memories of the cabin, but the sense of dread. It didn't matter where I was. I always felt it. The suffocating silence, the weight of the cameras watching me. Even in the middle of a crowd, I felt like I was being observed. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, heart racing, convinced that someone was in the room with me, that Dean was watching me. I had to get out of my own head. I tried to leave the hotel after a week. I tried to re-enter the world, to act like things were okay, but they weren't. My hands shook every time I reached for my phone. My nerves were shot. The simplest things, going to the store, walking down the street, felt like monumental tasks. I couldn't go back to Denver, not yet. I rented a small apartment in a different city. It was temporary, just somewhere to breathe. Somewhere I could start over, but nothing felt the same. I tried to start working again, freelance jobs, design projects, but every time I sat down to focus, I couldn't. My mind kept going back to the cabin, back to the cameras, the photographs, the twisted games Dean had played. I found it hard to concentrate. I couldn't focus. The worst part, the fear was still there, the paranoia. When I passed people on the street, I found myself glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see Dean standing there, watching me from the crowd. When I sat at my desk, I kept expecting to see one of those cameras hidden in the corner, recording my every move. It was madness. It was insane, but it didn't stop. It wouldn't stop. The questions in my mind didn't go away. Why had he done it? I had tried to piece together the events in my head, tried to make sense of it all. Maybe he had done it for the thrill. Maybe he had some sick need to control people, or maybe, just maybe, it had nothing to do with me at all. Maybe I was just another mark, but none of it made sense. None of it. I didn't even know if I wanted to know the answers. But the one question I kept asking myself was why? Why had I stayed so long? Why hadn't I left when I started to feel like something was wrong? I could have left. I could have just walked out. But no, I stayed. Maybe I was too naive. Maybe I was too eager to escape from the world I'd been living in, so I ignored the warning signs. Maybe I just wanted to believe that nothing bad could ever happen to me. But it had, and now, there was no going back. Months passed. Time didn't heal anything, not really, but it did numb the pain. Slowly, I started talking to people again, trying to push the memories aside, pretending that I was normal. But deep down, I knew I wasn't. Not anymore. I was different. And the worst part, I had no idea what would happen next. I kept going to therapy. I tried to talk through the events, but nothing felt like it would make it better. Nothing would ever fix what Dean had done to me. The hardest part wasn't facing the physical aftermath, the bruises, the exhaustion. It was the psychological scar, the one that wouldn't go away, the one that kept me questioning every person I met, every stranger I saw on the street. Could it happen again? I had no answer. In the end, I realized something. I couldn't move forward by looking back. I couldn't let Dean define me, and I couldn't let that cabin control my life forever. So I tried. I tried to start over. I moved to a new city. I got a new job. I met new people. Slowly, bit by bit, I started to rebuild what had been taken from me. But it wasn't easy, and I knew it never would be. Every time I walked into a new room, sat in front of a new screen, or heard a creak in the floorboards, I wondered, is this it? Is this when it all starts again? I didn't have the answers. But I did have one thing. I was still here. And that was enough for now. I'd never truly understood fear until I found myself running through the woods that night. Fear wasn't just about running from something dangerous. It was about feeling trapped, being caught in a web you didn't even know existed until it was too late. Fear wasn't something that left you once you escaped. It lingered in your bones, in the shadows of your mind, in the moments of silence when you let your guard down. It followed you, clung to you, and whispered your weaknesses like an old friend. I'd been running ever since, but what I didn't know then was that running wasn't enough. The scars, the trauma, they didn't just fade with time. They became part of me. It had been over a year since I left that cabin. A year since I ran out into the night, my heart beating in my throat, terrified that Dean was right behind me. A year since I discovered what it was like to have your life turned upside down by someone you thought was harmless. I had moved across the country. I had moved out of the city, away from the noise, away from everything that reminded me of who I had been. It felt like I had been reborn, but not in the way people imagine. I wasn't born again into something better. I was born again into something that had to be learned the hard way. I rented a small apartment in a quiet town by the coast. It was nothing fancy, just a simple, modest place with a view of the ocean. The sound of the waves crashing against the shore was oddly calming, a constant reminder that the world didn't stop, no matter how much I wanted to. The first few months were difficult. I spent my days going through the motions, trying to do what I had always done. I worked from home, designing websites and logos, trying to force some sense of normalcy back into my life. But I could never fully escape the feeling that someone was watching. It wasn't constant, but it would sneak up on me when I least expected it. Every time I passed a window or glanced at a dark corner of a room, I would catch myself wondering, is someone there? Is it Dean? I could never shake that feeling. And then one day I realized something. I wasn't afraid of Dean anymore. I wasn't afraid of what he could do to me or what had happened at that cabin. No, what I was afraid of, what still haunted me, was that he had taken something more important than my safety. He had taken my sense of self. I had spent so long being someone I thought I was supposed to be, a man who could handle anything, a man who controlled his environment. But after everything I went through, I found that I didn't know who I was anymore. I couldn't even trust my own instincts. I'd spent years building a life based on an illusion of safety, only to have it shattered in the space of a few days. And once that illusion was gone, all that was left was the raw truth. I had no idea who I was without it, without control. I tried to put the pieces of my life back together, but I kept feeling the weight of the past pressing on my shoulders. Nothing felt the same anymore. Every decision felt like a gamble, every moment spent worrying about whether I was being followed, being watched. I couldn't trust myself. I didn't trust myself to make the right decisions, to understand what was real. It wasn't long before I realized I needed help, not just to deal with the fear, but to start over, to rebuild myself. I couldn't keep living in this limbo. It wasn't just about escaping the cabin or getting away from Dean. It was about finding a way to be okay with the person I had become. So, I sought therapy. I'm not sure why it took me so long. Maybe it was the shame. Maybe it was the belief that I should be able to fix myself. But I was wrong. I couldn't fix myself on my own. I needed someone who could help me navigate through the trauma, through the pain, through the paranoia that never seemed to leave me. The first few sessions were painful. Talking about the cabin, about the cameras, about Dean, it all felt like opening wounds I had been desperately trying to ignore. But slowly I began to understand something crucial. Healing doesn't happen in a straight line. There are good days and there are bad days. Some days I feel strong enough to face the world. Some days I can sit at my desk and design without hearing that voice in the back of my head, whispering that I'm being watched. Other days I curl up in bed and let the fear take over. And that's okay, it's part of the process. After some time, I started to feel like I could trust myself again. The fear would always be there, lurking in the background. It would always be part of my life, but I was learning how to live with it. I started taking small steps forward. I would go to the grocery store, walk around the neighborhood, get a cup of coffee in the local cafe. I wasn't the same person who walked into that cabin all those months ago. I didn't know if I'd ever be able to feel safe again. But I realized that safety wasn't something anyone could promise. It was something I had to create for myself. I would never forget what happened. But I didn't have to live in that cabin anymore. I didn't have to live in that fear. Life didn't go back to normal. There was no going back to the life I had before the cabin. There was no return to the comfort I once felt in my routines. Everything felt different. The world felt different. But maybe that was okay. Maybe life wasn't about going back to the way things were. Maybe it was about learning to live with the scars, learning to build something new from the ashes. I started taking small steps toward that new beginning. I volunteered at a local animal shelter, something I had always wanted to do but never had the time for. I started making new connections, new friends, people who didn't know my past. And while I couldn't forget it, I could learn to live with it, to integrate it into who I was now. One evening, as I stood on the balcony of my small apartment, watching the sun dip below the horizon, I realized something. I had survived. It didn't matter how hard it had been. It didn't matter how much it hurt. I had made it out. And no matter how much it felt like the darkness would swallow me whole, there was still light. It was there, hidden in the cracks, in the small moments of joy, in the connections I was beginning to rebuild. I had been broken, but I was whole again. Not in the way I thought I would be, not in the way I imagined, but in the way that mattered most. I had survived, and that was enough.